Hello, Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today we'll cover the nervous system, but specifically the synapses. We're going to define the synapse. What is the presynaptic, postsynaptic, synaptic relation, coding, circuit, different things about synapse. The basic idea, how neurons talk to each other. Now, we talk about the nervous system as the system that allows you to communicate. That's the main function of the nervous system. We have receptors, like sensory neurons, that receive information. That information is sent to the central nervous system, to the brain or spinal cord. Then that information is being processed and the signal or the command is given to a motor neuron for an effector organ to carry the job. Basically, you receive information that has to be integrated inside the central nervous system, and a response has to be given through a command. Now, if you look at these neurons here, you see that the neuron receiving the information is a sensory neuron by function, but by structure, it is a unipolar neuron. You can see that here. The part of the neuron that receives information will be the dendrite, and it'll go through the cell body and get to the axon terminal. And this sensory neuron, which happens to be a unipolar, will communicate with the next neuron, number 2 here, which is an interneuron. Remember, international interneuron, between the neuron. Then it will give command, right? It will give command to another neuron, a motor neuron, by function. So by structure, which is the multipolar neuron that will talk to the muscle here to carry the job, which is an effector. So the job of the nervous system, which is communication, is done through the relationship between neurons. That relationship, that connection between neurons is called synapse. So what is the synapse? If you look at the neuron on your left, you see the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon through the axon terminal. When things get to the axon terminal, basically that end of the axon will talk to the other neuron. Look at this here. You have the soma, the axon, and the synapse. So a synapse is just the connection between the end, like the axon terminal of one neuron, to the next neuron. So the neuron before the synapse is called presynaptic neuron. The one after the synapse is called the postsynaptic neuron. You can see that the synapse is now always on the cell body. At the bottom picture, you can see the axon terminal forms a synapse at the axon, at the dendrite area on the next, on the postsynaptic cell. On the one at the bottom, you see forming synapse on the cell body. But if you look on your right, the next one, this last one, the neuron synapse on the axon terminal of the next neuron. So that's going to be axonic synapse. So the other one is axodendritic synapse and axosomatic synapse. So the synapse is not always on one particular part. It could be on the dendrite, the cell body, or the axon terminal. So we look at the big picture here. You see the presynaptic neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, and the space between the pre and postsynaptic is called the synaptic cleft. Now you see also vesicles, so the little bags holding something. That something is the neurotransmitter that is secreted by the presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron. And the postsynaptic neuron has receptors. These receptors will be activated by the neurotransmitter to open gates so that our action potential we talk about can happen. Sodium can come in, make the cell positive, depolarize, and stuff so forth. If you look at the neuron here, what happens at the synapse? Look at it. You have a stimulus coming to the dendrite that's going to be running through the axon to go to the axon terminal. And this neuron has to give a response, and that response will be the release of a neurotransmitter or a new wave of electrical activity in the next cell across the synapse, which will be the postsynaptic cell. Now, what will be secreted? Neurotransmitters. So what is a neurotransmitter? A neurotransmitter is a molecule that is released when a signal reaches a synaptic knob. And that neurotransmitter had to bind to a receptor on another cell and change something about that cell. That cell that receives is the postsynaptic neuron. So the example of neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, we talk about in the neuromuscular junction. It is released to excite the muscle so the muscle can do something. We also have amino acid, monoamine, and neuropeptides. These are examples of neurotransmitter. These are things that are secreted, products that are secreted at the end of the neuron after an action potential so that neuron can communicate with the next neuron, right? You see acetylcholine, you see neuropeptides, different amino acids that are secreted to act on the postsynaptic neuron. By acting on the postsynaptic neuron, it could be that the neurotransmitter excites, make the cell do more stuff, or it can inhibit, stopping the cell from doing stuff. If it excites the next cell, if the presynaptic neuron excites or make the postsynaptic cell do more, it will open sodium gates for sodium to come in to depolarize the cell so that an action potential can happen. Or it can open chlorine gates so that chlorine can come in to make the cell even more negative to stop it from firing an action potential. We call that inhibitory postsynaptic potential. Now, when it's finished, when there's no more action, the neurotransmitter will be depleted. That means there's going to be no neurotransmitter, so that stops the action potential. And all the acetylcholine, for example, that are secreted, recycled, and then kept on the side. Now, what is neural integration? If neurons have to secrete neurotransmitter, don't you think it will be important for them to decide when to fire an action potential, when not to fire? They do that based on many things. We call that integration. They have to think about it, kind of make sense of everything to make things happen. That could be through summation. They can just take a lot of information and add together to make a decision. Or they can be one neuron make the other one a little bit more, a little bit less. We call that facilitation or inhibition. For example, if you look at this, you have summation. That means you have a lot of neurons that work together to add up to make things happen. If it's temporal, that means one does something now, the next neuron will take over after you finish so that they can add up to get something on. Or it could be also spatial, meaning that you can have different neurons acting on different part of this next neuron to make it do more, or even less, depending how you work on it. Usually, if you do it more, we call the presynaptic facilitation. What does that mean? It means that a neuron can have another neuron working on it to make it more. Or it could be presynaptic inhibition. One neuron can tell the other neuron to stop, not to do something. So neurons, we call that integration. So everything has to come together to make sense. What is coding? It means that the nervous system has to make sense of the code. If you do something, you taste food or you hear something or you smell something, that code will be integrated. The nervous system will have different excitation of different neurons and use that as the result of the process. So that could be qualitative. It means that it's going to determine the quality. What kind of stuff is this? Is it a light or is it a taste of sugar? Or it could be quantitative. Is it a big hit or small hit? So meaning that the force, the amount and energy you use to have excitation can determine the result. Or just the quality, what type of thing is it? So neural pools. Neurons don't work singly. They work together as a group. So many neurons have to work together to make something happen. For example, moving your limb when you're walking, many neurons will walk together because when you walk, you kind of move your leg in a rhythmic way. Many neurons will work in different areas of your body so that your arm and your leg can go in a pattern way. So neural circuits, it means that neurons work in different parallel. We have diverging neuron, converging, reverberating, and parallel. So what does that mean? We have 4 types of neural circuits. You can see them here: diverging, converging, reverberating, and parallel. So what does that mean? You see diverging, one neuron will diverge. Converging, you will take many neurons that will work on just one neuron. Or reverberating, the neuron will work on the next one. It's just like a positive feedback type of thing. And parallel, you can have several neurons working online to end up on the same neuron. So to conclude, what is the synapse? The synapse is just a connection between 2 neurons, right? We have presynaptic neuron, the neuron before the synapse, and the postsynaptic neuron, the neuron after the synapse. What is the synaptic cleft? Is the space between the pre and postsynaptic neuron. What is synaptic vesicle? These are little bags that contain the neurotransmitter. that will be released to do the job. What is synaptic relationship? It means that synaptic relation that means that synapse neuron work together. So one neuron work on the other neuron. It could be excitatory, it could be inhibitory. So one neuron can make the other neuron work more or less depending on the situation. Neurotransmitters or products, chemicals that are secreted by the neuron on the next neuron to do the job. Neural integration means that you have to put a lot of things together to make the neuron work. Some of them will excite, inhibit, the neuron have to put together. Coding, the neuron have to use code, just message to make sense out of it. In the circuit, we have different lines of neuron. So synapse, connection between neurons. So I hope this is going to be very helpful. We'll see you in class, and thank you very much for watching.